Hey there, it's Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable for Thursday, June 5th, 2025. Why podcasting's advertising advantage is bigger than we thought. Well, yesterday we released our latest research project, The Advertising Landscape, Trust and Attention, and it really is a groundbreaking study in both design and execution. Very difficult to get a true cross-media comparison of multiple ad-supported media platforms across multiple criteria. But thanks to a huge sample, over 5,000 Americans 18+, and a novel research design, this project has done just that, a credible comparison of 22 ad-supported platforms and how they perform in over 20 different parameters. We've done this by honing our inquiry for each platform to their prime users, the daily, most active users of each ad-supported medium, so it's apples to apples, a fair comparison. This enables us to make a true comparison of every significant place an advertiser could stick an ad, from podcasts to streaming TV to Facebook. What we found isn't just good news for podcasting, it's a complete reframing of how we should think about the medium's role in the advertising ecosystem. Let's start with the headline that made me double-take. Podcasts achieve 86% recall of advertising among their prime users. That is not a verbal typo. 86%. To put that in context, that's the highest ad recall rate we measured across any of the 22 ad-supported media platforms in this study. This research shows that ad-supported podcasting reaches 31% of Americans monthly, which is certainly lower than some other platforms like commercial AM/FM radio or Facebook. But here's where the math gets interesting. And here's where I want to introduce a concept that I think will change how you think about media planning. Effective reach. Effective reach is simply reach multiplied by recall. It's not enough to put your message in front of eyeballs or earballs. Those senses actually need to process and remember what they've seen. When you calculate podcasting's effective reach, 31% monthly reach times 86% recall, you get 27%, which means that more than 1 in 4 Americans not only could see your podcast ad, but would actually remember it. Compared to platforms with much larger nominal reach, podcasting suddenly doesn't look like the scrappy underdog anymore. It looks like the smart money. One of the findings that absolutely floored me was that podcasting shows no gender gap in advertising attention, which I wrote about last week. Men and women recall advertising and podcasting at nearly the same rate, 86% and 85% respectively, which is virtually unheard of in media research. I've been analyzing media consumption data for decades, and almost every other platform shows some kind of attention differential between men and women. But podcasting? Now it's dead even. This isn't just a nice to have for advertisers trying to reach female consumers. It's a fundamental advantage that most other media can't match. We also observed this consistency across all age groups, 89% recall for 18 to 34 and 35 to 54-year-olds, and a very respectable 77% for those 55 and older. Most media shows dramatic fall-offs across age groups. Podcasting maintains both reach and effectiveness across the spectrum, with particularly strong performance among the multicultural audiences that many brands struggle to reach authentically. Well, one of my favorite findings from this research gives us concrete evidence for something we've all felt intuitively. 45% find podcast advertising authentic and natural, and that ties podcasting with TikTok for the highest authenticity scores we measured across 22 different platforms. But here's the crucial difference. TikTok's authenticity comes from its algorithm-driven, youth-skewing content ecosystem. Not a thing you can say fast many times. Podcasting's authenticity comes from something much more durable. The self-selected relationship between hosts and their audiences that cuts across demographic and other divides. When you choose to subscribe to, follow a podcast, you're making an intentional decision to let that host into your life on a regular basis. That creates the kind of trust that advertisers simply can't buy anywhere else. But here's where things get really interesting and where I think we've been underselling podcasting's true value proposition. We've always talked about trust in podcasting, but we've never quantified it at this scale. The numbers are striking. 46% of Americans trust podcast content moderation. Compare that to Facebook at 26% or Reddit at 25%. 51% believe podcast content is factual and accurate. Again, very near the top of the list. And here's the kicker. 48% believe podcast advertising claims are true. To put that into perspective, social media platforms average in the low 30s for advertising claim believability. That's not just a small difference, that's a fundamentally different relationship between audience and content. Across virtually every trust metric that we measured, social platforms consistently ranked at the bottom. Discord, Facebook, Reddit, Threads, they all scored between 19 and 25% on advertising message trust. Well, this creates what I'm calling a halo effect in reverse. The general lack of content credibility on these platforms creates a negative association that drags down advertising effectiveness. People don't just not trust the ads, they don't trust the environment in which they appear. As we saw with attention, the trust gap persists across all demographics. While the 35 to 54 demographic showed the highest level of trust in podcasting's voices, the medium was the most trustworthy with 55 plus as well. Moreover, multicultural audiences show exceptionally high trust in podcast advertising. Black audiences show 51% trust in podcast advertising voices. Hispanic Latino audiences hit 49%. Asian audiences hit 46%. Podcasting represents a massive opportunity for brands trying to authentically reach diverse customers. Hispanic Latino audiences rate podcast advertising 19 points higher in authenticity than social media. That's not just a preference, that's a revelation. Well, I've been in this business long enough to know that no single study tells the complete story. But the advertising landscape shows us that podcasting has moved beyond being an experimental spend or a nice-to-have in a media plan. The combination of high attention, exceptional trust, and demographic consistency that podcasting delivers doesn't exist anywhere else in the media landscape. The challenge for our industry isn't proving that podcasting works anymore. It's making sure that agencies and brands understand just how well it works and how it can amplify their other media investments. Because here's the thing. When you have a medium that delivers 86% ad recall amongst a highly trusting, demographically diverse audience, you don't just have an advertising vehicle, you have a competitive advantage. And that, my friends, is what I call the trust dividend. And it's time we started to collect on it. Well, the full advertising landscape trust and attention report is available at soundsprofitable.com/research. We'll have a link in the show notes. But thank you to Signal Hill Insights for fielding this study, and to our research partners in this project, American Public Media, BetterHelp, ESPN Podcasts, Media Bodies, NPR, and the SXM Podcast Network. Thanks for listening this week to Why Podcasting's Advertising Advantage is Bigger Than We Thought. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Tom Webster, and I'll see you next time.